to Zoom. So we are live.
Nice.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Noonan Gores, the director of HEAL. And I'm here again with Jen Kozek, the author of Healing Without Hurting, an amazing, amazing book about her journey healing her son, Evan, from autism and apraxia and other spectrum disorders. And she did it all naturally, and she educated herself. So she's here to educate us.
Yes.
Yeah, and her book, she's got a brand new edition out with her book Healing Without Hurting, as well as a new audio version. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we'll dive right into, I think people tuning in will want to know what, autism is misunderstood. There's so many, there's so much speculation about where does it come from? Why is there this influx in the last 20 years of children with autism? What have you learned, and what is your opinion about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a lot of people want to say that it's evolution, it's the new way children are communicating. And, I have to say that that's partly true, and that our children are coming in very, very, very sensitive for many, many reasons. And so I definitely don't take that away from them. I think that they're here for a reason, and I think it's to kind of raise the consciousness. There was actually a really great book, actually a quote that said, it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes an autistic child to raise the consciousness of the village. And I do think that they are here for a reason, and they're very special and very spiritual. And that's why we have to feed them better, because they are sensitive. And, when people want to ask me, why is this happening? The toxic burden in this country and in the world has grown exponentially, and we're really not addressing the toxins, and we're not looking at the epidemic that's actually happening. And it's not just autism, Alzheimer's. How many older folks are you seeing now with dementia, Alzheimer's disease? They're not able to control themselves. They're not allowed, they're not able to sleep. They're not able to eat. Their executive functioning is very impaired. And younger and younger and younger, we're seeing more and more people with cancer. We're seeing more and more people with autoimmune disorder. And we have to ask ourselves why. This is an epidemic. Genetics just don't happen. Depression, anxiety, cancer. But why are certain people turning on those genes, and why? Is it lifestyle? And, the field of epigenetics is showing us that, yes, it has a lot to do with what we're putting into our body, how many chemicals we're getting in contact with, how well our bodies are able to detox these chemicals.
So how did you do that with Evan? Like, what you learned about the gut health, walk us through like the improvements you saw with Evan once you started changing his diet, learning about the food coloring and all these toxins in food that will neurologically affect your son. Like, Tell us, for instance, just so people with kids dealing with outbursts and symptoms of spectrum disorders, where do you start? What do you think is the number one thing?
So I started with a GI gastroenterologist, and I was very concerned because Evan had a lot of GI symptoms. He would always complain of having a stomach ache. He had, GERD, he had reflux, he had all these things going on. And when I took him to a pediatrician and a gastroenterologist, they just basically tested him for the big ones. They tested him for celiac disease and Crohn's disease and things like that. And when those tests came back negative, they told me that, Evan doesn't have a gluten sensitivity, that is absolutely fine. And it really took more research and me finding functional medicine physicians as well as naturopathic physicians that actually started to do a full workup on Evan. And that included a GI panel. There are labs out there that are, fantastic. Genova Diagnostics is one of them, in which you can actually test the bacteria strands in the gut. So a lot of people, you hear leaky gut, you hear about taking probiotics. I had no idea there's actually a test that will show you what strands of the bacteria in your gut that you're deficient in, what the balance is, how well you're metabolizing and breaking down fats and protein. And so, there's so much science out there now that is actually helping these functional medicine doctors kind of come up with a very individualized plan. And so once we started addressing some of the deficiencies, the nutritional deficiencies, and we started to get his gut improved, all of a sudden we started to see a tremendous difference in him and his ability to speak, and his ability to function. And that's all we want, right? That's, as parents, he can have the autism diagnosis forever, but I don't want him dependent on medication, and I want him to be the happiest and the healthiest child he could possibly be. I did not, being a therapist, I knew medication was like the next thing they were going to recommend, and I just didn't want my son on medication. And that's kind of what led me down this path.
Amazing. Okay, so tell me, so besides diet, and again, we can go into more detail. If you want to go into detail, I would recommend getting Jen's book, Healing Without Hurting, because we have limited time here. What other therapies did you explore with Evan, and what did you find most effective? Because, a lot of people, some of these brain balance or cranial sacral or some of these things that I know you've tried,
yeah.
they have mixed reviews. Some call them pseudoscience, and
yeah.
and I know that with alternative therapies for adults and children, it's hard to measure the concrete results. Even with acupuncture, you may feel amazing after and the symptoms may subside, but they tend to be more expensive in a lot of people's eyes. What did you find through these alternative therapies, which worked relative to maybe some more traditional therapies that were covered by insurance? How do you navigate that?
Well, it's interesting because there's a whole umbrella of alternative therapies, and they're not really alternative. They're just non-traditional, right? And so I love it's pseudoscience and all of that. Basically, we're inviting the brain to start functioning the way it's supposed to do, which is to reset the balance in the immune system to help, it's like an orchestra. And so most people don't recognize that our brain has a tremendous amount of neuroplasticity, and we can retrain it. And so if your brain automatically jumps into, say, the beta wave, which is high anxiety, and we can do a therapy to kind of lower that into, bring the child or the person back into the theta brainwave activity. That's where it's like the calmest, that's like right before sleep. And so our brains aren't doing what it should be doing naturally. And so we have almost done every single therapy. One of the therapies we did do is neurofeedback or biofeedback. Neurofeedback is a little bit more passive, in which the kid, the child does not have to actively participate. They can actually just kind of sit and watch a movie. And what happens is it provides feedback. So if their brain is thinking the way that we want it to for, say, relaxation, then all of a sudden it gives them kind of like a ding. It like gives them feedback, so that it kind of trains the brain sort of kind of to get back on that track. And so obviously the very first thing we need to do is kind of lower that inflammation in the brain and work all the biomedical treatments and so forth and so on, which is all outlined in the book. But then we need to go back and we need to start training that brain to respond more appropriately to stimuli. Through traditional therapies, occupational therapy, physical therapy could be very, very helpful. But what I've realized and what I found out, that there, just like there are different doctors out there, there are different naturopaths, there are different occupational and physical therapists that are doing different types of therapy. And one of the things that I find to be most helpful is that integration of the reflexes. A lot of our children with milestones that, were never met or, are very delayed, have these primitive reflexes that were never dropped off appropriately during, development. And so we have to kind of go in there and kind of redo it. It's kind of like a do-over. So I find that a lot of the therapists, if they're trained in integrative reflex therapy, they're in sensory processing disorders and so forth, that they are, more helpful in some cases with some of our kids. Vision therapy too. A lot of our children not only have vestibular issues going on, there's a lot of vestibular, their body and time and space is off. And so there's lots of therapies that can kind of bring all of this back together again. And when that happens, things start improving and it's unbelievable. Chiropractors, cranial sacral therapists. You know, our children respond to energy healing and our children respond to energy work. And so when I look for practitioners for my own kids, you know, I look for cranial sacral therapists. I look for chiropractors that are trained in more of a body-like approach to treatment. And so, you know, we've done neurofeedback, we've done brain balance therapy, which basically was kind of like taking a whole bunch of different modalities in holistic health and kind of bringing it all together into one center, which I found very helpful because they did a little of the integrative reflexes, they did a little vision therapy, and they also brought in kind of like the balancing in the right and the left hemisphere of the brain. So, you know, all very helpful, honestly.
Have you looked into polyvagal theory? Jamie Colston is asking.
Oh, no, I haven't.
Okay. Maybe Jamie can inform us. I'm not aware either.
But I will be looking that up to find out.
Polyvagal.
I mean, you know, it's sometimes some of these things are like listed under so many different names and categories. I may know what that is and not really know what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Nicole and I just hopped on and she's asking if these therapies actually work for ADHD as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I have realized is that ADHD is on the spectrum and that we're talking about 1 out of 44 children now having autism spectrum disorder. And that does not even include the ADHD kids. And when you include them, because you really need to, because a lot of our ADHD kids also are oppositionally defiant. They also have a lot of OCD and anger tendencies. And, you know, it's just, I feel, a milder case of someone on the autism spectrum. So absolutely, attention and focus, I think, is something that, you know, diet and food sensitivity is often correct, and nutritional deficiencies. I mean, I know for Evan, dairy was one of the biggest ones for brain fog. And so again, you know, if we just go to the therapy and we just go to a supplement and try to fix this, we're not going to yield the same results as if we're kind of healing the whole body, because you really have to address the underlying causes of some of these conditions. And then it just helps the therapies along. And we aren't wasting thousands and thousands of dollars on therapies that are minimally working because we haven't really addressed the root cause of why these children are in the state they're in.
And the root cause, you would say in a simple sentence, is?
Gut health. So what we find out is that this autism in general is a metabolic, immunologic, and digestive disorder. And what I mean by that in a simple sentence is that our gut houses 95% of our serotonin. And when our gut is not happy, neither is our brain. When our gut is not healthy, we are not focused. There is a vagus nerve that runs between the gut and the brain. It is considered, our gut is our second brain. And, you know, doctors will admit that when we're anxious, our stomach will hurt, but it works exactly the other way around, actually more so. So very often we're always looking at the symptom of anxiety, but really what's going on is inflammation in the intestinal system, and we have to address it.
Okay. So I have a question from Kara, sorry, I'm not sure how you pronounce the name. She emailed this question in. My son is on the low end of the spectrum and was diagnosed with motor stereotypes, arm flapping and finger wiggling mostly. Was Evan diagnosed with these? Did his flapping go away? What exact tests were run and who ran them? Her son's pediatrician basically told her to just live with it.
Yeah, my pediatrician told me to just live with it too, and that he was a boy, and you know, so he's getting excited and he's flapping. So who cares? So Evan did exhibit sensory processing issues, especially he would hold his ears when it was very, very loud. If we went to a musical performance, I remember we went to see Max and Ruby on Broadway or off Broadway, and he held his ears the entire time. And then he would get very excited and he would do one of these things. Tics are also very, very common in our children, which sometimes it could look like a tic. He would roll his eye, or he would, suck on his bottom lip. And so some children exhibit motor tics where they're kind of repetitively saying things over and over again. And so, yes, absolutely. Once we start addressing what the root cause of this is, and that's why I recommend, if you can, get to a naturopath or functional medicine practitioner to run. There is a whole battery of metabolic testing, and in my book I go into it. But basically, we're running a fecal test, we're running saliva testing, We're running urine tests, and we're also running some blood work. And, you know, depending on how aggressive the doctor that you see and what symptoms are presenting themselves will determine where that doctor sort of wants to go with the testing. And that, you know, it's so important that we find someone that not only can run the test or order the testing, but somebody that knows what to do to remedy the situation. So even with, you know, in the great scenario, a pediatrician will tell you that, I'm sorry, I don't know how to treat this, but so that your insurance will cover it, let's run some of these tests that these other doctors are asking us to run and work collaboratively. And so that's all we can really hope for. If you can't find a physician that really is 100%, knows how to treat this, then the best we can do is hope for one that at least is open-minded and won't send you to the psychiatrist instead of the naturopath.
Did heavy metals come up in your discovery? Did Evan have them? Because I've heard there's a link between heavy metals in the brain and autism.
Yes, and actually we just retested him and he has high uranium, even everything we've done. So what this is telling us is, yes, when we do the studies, we see that children on the autism spectrum have more metal in their body than the neurotypical peer. And so it's very, very important that we have practitioners that know how to test for this, which is usually the best testing is a hair sample where you're getting the root of the hair. Baby teeth, obviously, is another way that's a little bit more difficult to accomplish. There are blood tests for heavy metals, but blood testing, unfortunately, is only going to show you like the last 30 days of exposure. And so the hair root follicle seems to get the best result. And so what we're finding in so many children is, unfortunately, their bodies are not detoxing effectively. So not only are we bombarding them with environmental chemicals, food chemicals, pesticides, and my child does not eat any, most 99% of the time it's organic and it's healthy, but somehow, some way, this child still has some glyphosate in his body when we just recently tested him, and high uranium. So we immediately tested our water and our well, and it's not coming from that. So now I think I'm going to spend the money and see if maybe the coconut water or something else he's ingesting has high uranium. I have no idea where it's coming from. More than neurological conditions, it can cause a lot of kidney, disruption and kidney disease. And so I sort of have to kind of figure out why. But in the meantime, we're just boosting the glutathione level. We're doing homeopathy to kind of, we're using tinctures of homeopathy that actually act just like the uranium to kind of pull the uranium out of the body and to tell the body to release it. We also have to up his mineral level during this time. Minerals are the #1 way we help to detox our own body. And so there's lots of things that we can do at home in our kitchen that will help us detox on a regular basis. But sometimes we really need to go in stronger. And that is when I would highly recommend getting somebody to help you do that. Unfortunately, lots of desperate moms and dads out there are going to find detox remedies and strategies and just start going away at it. And the kidneys have to be supported, the liver has to be supported, and the gut has to be eliminating. And so if if the child's very, toxic and has constipation issues, which is very common in our children, it's not the time to start detoxing them.
So work with a professional like a naturopath or
somebody that knows what they're doing. Yes. And obviously I'm the one, I like less is more. So for me, I like finding homeopaths, homeopathic physicians and doctors that, that practice homeopathic medicine. It's a very gentle way of helping the body to detox and very, light supplementation, like the full-blown chelation. For some children, it's just way too much. And I find that in this community, there are children that are being over-treated. And so I would just be very careful.
And a lot of people are asking, I need to find a doctor or a naturopath or a homeopathic doctor in my area. Is there a resource online that you trust that has these people listed?
Yes. So I am on the board of directors for epidemicanswers.org. So if anyone's listening and wants to go to epidemicanswers.org, there is a provider tab, and there are providers all over the country, and that could, that do this. And also Generation Rescue, which is Jenny McCarthy's organization, also has a list of resources and practitioners that also, treat our children.
And we have a couple more questions here. Lynn Heeser is asking, have you done a timeline of any possible exposures you may have experienced during your pregnancy? And I know a lot went on in your pregnancy in his early years.
Yeah.
Just maybe you could just briefly talk about that experience, because maybe a mother doesn't know that giving her infant many cases of antibiotics for these different infections he had, or having a C-section, and how these things may affect the gut health of your child.
Absolutely. So of course, since doing this with Evan, I've done my own toxicology report and found out that I had very high cadmium in my body, which Evan did have, lead in my body. I grew up in Long Island, New York. Goodness knows what I was exposed to. I wasn't near a farm, so I knew I wasn't getting those toxic chemicals. But there are so many, chemicals in our environment, in our air, in our water, in our land, everywhere. And so when I started to recognize that, my prenatal care was not good. I had the traditional prenatal care where I went to the doctor and they gave me my vaccinations, but nobody was testing me for toxicity before I got pregnant. Nobody was testing me for genetic mutations that could cause havoc on a developing brain. I have the MTHFR, one of the variations of that. So I should have been not taking folic acid, which is what the doctor recommended. I should have been taking high doses of folate instead, which is non-synthetic. There are so many things that I should have been tested. My thyroid level should have been tested by a naturopath, because they do a much more thorough job in identifying thyroid conditions. All the studies that I'm reading now too is that children with mothers that have any type of brewing autoimmune disorder have, a much higher chance of developing an autism, diagnosis. Ooh. And so it's so important that we as mothers are getting, I didn't know that being on birth control pills for 15 years completely wiped out all my good gut bacteria. I had absolutely no idea. So I should have been loading up on the probiotics. I should have been eating fermented foods. I should have been detoxing myself. I should have been checking for these mutations. I mean, the list goes on, and actually a whole chapter in my book I've dedicated to how, what to feed your infant, and also how to take care of yourself before conception and after. Because this is so vitally important. We don't recognize that we're just passing our bad immunity and all of our toxins right through the placenta, right to our unborn child. And so,
And again, this is not about feeling guilty or blame. No. There's so many toxins in our environment. There's responsibility on the parts of the practitioners, on the parts of the mothers, on the parts of, so
yes,
nobody's to blame. So we could do better.
I didn't know. I mean, we do the best we can, so we know better, then we do better. I think that's Maya Angelou's favorite quotes. And it's so, I was giving my kids, chocolate cake from Costco with blue frosting on it, and I remember when we started doing some, filming for the documentary, and I was looking back at some home videos, I was horrified at what I was feeding my children and myself. I thought going to McDonald's, a couple times a week wasn't so bad. What was, hey, why is that bad?
I was raised in McDonald's. Shocking. I'm so healthy.
I remember going to get my first microwave, and the way they showed me it worked was they put a styrofoam cup with water in it and showed us how we could boil water in a styrofoam cup. Great. Fantastic. Yeah. All the plastics too, all the phthalates, all of the VOCs, the Teflon pans that all of our mothers used, all of that. We're just waking up to the fact that any invention that has come forward, we really should take a good look at, did it really help? And
educating ourselves. Yeah.
But it is completely backfiring. Anything that saves us money or time is backfiring.
Question it.
Yeah.
Convenience might not be the healthiest choice.
No.
Real quick, because I want to get into just one more question about, gut health is the key. Raising a child, especially a hyperactive or one that is, has these behavioral symptoms. Yeah. It's so tough to get them to eat healthy or clean up their diet, or when mothers are working or stressed, or fathers, it's hard to make the time or find the time to really give them clean food, or some people, afford organic all the time. So how did you get Evan and your daughter on board to eating healthy when, they go to school and the pressures of the other kids with Twinkies or whatever, and you even taught them muscle testing. So briefly describe, give these parents out there some hints on how to get your kids on board with eating healthy.
Yeah. So it's very, very difficult at first, because a lot of parents will come to me and say, but Jen, they are so picky. They won't eat. Now, they'll starve if I started giving them, these foods. And I said, listen, they are starving. That's why they have these problems. And when you give them processed food loaded with chemicals, it's not food, it's food-like. And so really educating them, getting them on board. I actually wrote a children's book, a health, ADHD for Healthy Me and ADHD Free, because I needed to write a story for children to understand why their mother was buying organic food, why we were taking supplements, why we were going to a special doctor, and why we were pooping in a cup for him. So I wrote that book for children. I definitely think, my kids now, they come home and they say, Mom, this person's eating this and this person is eating that, and I wish they can eat healthier. They've become their own little nutritionists. They have to get on board with this. We can't force it on them. They have to want to do it. My daughter was like 6 or 7 when we started the diet with her. And so she was a harder sell. Evan was quite young, and so he doesn't remember eating, what eating that way was like. But Elena does, because she was my girl that I used to go to Dunkin' Donuts with on Fridays right before preschool. And so, yum. And so she was harder to convince. She's like, I'm not doing this. And she's a strong-willed kid. So we did a lot of the testing, and she's a numbers girl. She's definitely not my child. She's definitely my husband's child. She's all about the numbers. And so I showed her the tests, and I said, look, Elena, look at the foods you can't eat. You're sensitive to, your body doesn't like, look at your nutritional levels. And she was like horrified. And then she looked at me, she goes, I'm still not doing this. And so, I had to kind of pick my battles, and I was like, oh, gee, how am I going to do this? Well, about a week later, she came to me, she goes, okay, I'm ready now. And then I said, perfect. I'm like, well, we're going to do this for a year. And, to a year, kids don't, that seems like forever or whatever. But I said, we're going to do it for a year. We're just going to see how you feel. If you don't feel any better, we'll start eating it again. No problem. And so they have to, it's a conversation. Like, if you make going to the dentist scary, kids won't go to the dentist. If you make this part of your own lifestyle, and, I've learned a lot about the microbiome and how we share it with our family members. So if we attempt to try to, make the host healthier in our children, if we're not healthy ourselves, we're just going to pass those bacteria back to our children, the negative stuff. And so we just really feed each other. And it's so important that we all get on board with some of these things, and that when we heal our children, we actually turn around and end up healing ourselves. I was on Zoloft for a long time until doing all this with Evan and realizing, oh no, I got off of gluten and dairy. And I know that was one of the questions about gluten and dairy, and why are all these children getting off gluten and dairy and doing better? So I don't know if you want me to delve into that.
Well, I know a lot of people do. There's so much about gluten, dairy. I think it's also teaching your kids awareness, which was what you've done. You've taught them the muscle testing. They will hold a thing of food, and they'll feel if it's strong or weak for their system. What you've taught your kids is awareness. I've become aware now, and I eat really healthy, but I also eat, I also enjoy life and eat pizza and French fries, when I feel. So, but I start to notice now when I get a runny nose immediately after start eating something.
Right.
I start to notice my moods after. If I eat too much sugar, I get in a pissy mood, And so to teach kids to pay attention to how they feel, and for parents to start really watching your kids after they eat the cupcake or the sugary cereal or the food color, like whatever it is. So awareness is key on how your body, because your body really does tell you what it wants and what it doesn't.
Absolutely. Especially after you've been eating pretty well for a little while. And so when, my kids go to a birthday party now, they go, Mom, can't I just have a piece of that cake? Now we're gluten and dairy. I said, go ahead. I go, watch what will happen. And they do. They enjoy. I said, was it good? They're like, oh, it was delicious. I said, great. Give it an hour. Elena's having a complete meltdown, temper tantrum on the floor, banging her head, screaming and yelling. Evan is tearful. That's what he gets teary. And so I said, oh, how was that cake? They're like, well, and then they stop and they go, oh, it was horrible, Mom. Like, I can't believe it. So So, I mean, I don't want them to go crazy when they get to college. I just want them to, continue this lifestyle. And so I don't deprive them of it. I let them eat it. I gave them actually Pringles the other day because they needed the container to go to school to make some art project. And so we went to the gas station because we don't have it in the house. And I said, hey, you guys want some of these? So they ate them and they spit them out. And I was like, what are you doing? They're like, Mom, this tastes like chemicals. Now, when you're not used to eating chemicals and you eat that, you recognize that when you're eating it. And we're so mindlessly eating in this country, in the world.
Never learned. We were never taught that as a kid. That
we were never taught to check in. I mean, did you ever even eat a piece of like a wheat bread just by itself? It's actually pretty gross. I mean, just like everyone should just do this at home. Just put it in their mouth and just slowly chew and tell me, really, is it worth it?
Yeah. I think like you said, you need to detox before you even have that awareness, because your taste buds are just shut off,
Shut off. It's true.
So tell me, we're kind of winding down here, about Adam Lanza and the letter that you wrote to the New York Times.
Yeah, so I'm really hoping
and remind people who Adam Lanza is.
Yeah, so Adam Lanza was the 20-something-year-old, boy that gunned down 20 children and 6 administrators at Sandy Hook Elementary School, which is 10 miles from my house. And so as a psychotherapist, I started to treat families and first responders after that tragedy. And while doing that, with all my angst, I recognized that we weren't doing anything to help Adam. And so although I can say that most children on the autism spectrum would never commit such violence, and because they, most likely the most loving children, unfortunately, the wrong the wrong treatment, I think in some cases, whether it be the medication driving them to psychosis. I mean, I learned through Dr. Bach, MD, that too much circulating dopamine to begin with, and you give a child a psychostimulant or an SSRI and you reuptake that dopamine, that you can cause psychosis. And so is the interventions causing the psychosis? Is the fact that we're completely denying or completely minimizing the actual root causes of these issues? I mean, Adam Lanza lives in Connecticut, or lived in Connecticut. Lyme disease was rampant in Connecticut. Did Adam Lanza, and we'll never know, have an autoimmune encephalitis, brain inflammation due to an untreated Lyme infection? That is one thing, I am certain. There is an epidemic right now. I don't know if people understand. There's something called PANS and PANDAS, which is an underlying cause of psychosis, eating disorders, mental illness in children from an untreated strep infection or an untreated Lyme infection or Epstein-Barr. I'm actually at part of that Epidemic Answers. I was actually a co-author of another book called Brain Under Attack. And it talks about the non-traditional treatment for children with PANS and PANDAS. And, most traditional doctors, if they do even recognize it as a thing, they'll just put them on like loads and loads of antibiotic. And although antibiotics are life-saving and sometimes necessary, I think ongoing Lyme disease, when you have chronic Lyme disease and you put on antibiotics for years, in some cases, that it's actually backfiring because it's killing every bacteria, good and bad. And so, I wrote the article to the New York Times because I think it's so important that we start having the conversation. What is going on with these kids? I mean, these kids that are shooting up schools, these kids that are killing themselves, 30% increase in suicide in this country since 2005. One being my best friend's younger son. And I really think that we're just not doing our due diligence in our healthcare system to educate doctors to get the right care, to look at food sensitivities as a potential contributor, or a food sensitivity or nutritional deficiency. There are so many underlying conditions. There's something called an MAOA genetic mutation that actually 1 in 3 children, 1 out of 3 boys have, and it's actually considered the warrior gene. So if your son has this, they have a more likelihood of being aggressive. So again, there are so many things that we really need to be taking a better look at.
What was that again? What was that?
So it's called MAOA-A.
Okay.
Yep. And and all of these mutations are remedied through nutritionally, right? So depending on what your nutritional level is, and that's why there's never a blanket treatment for these things. That's very mainstream medical thinking, that you have the symptom and this is the treatment. What we want to do is that's why we need a full understanding. So we do the blood work, we do the saliva testing, we do these things. And so we can see what does the transmitters look like. You know, most people don't know that neurotransmitter testing is available through the urine, that we can get a pretty good idea of what's going on in the brain just from the urine test. You know, how much dopamine, how much serotonin, what's the balance? Is there epinephrine? No epinephrine. And so the medication that's aimed at increasing, you know, these levels in these kids are, you know, don't understand that we don't have a chemical deficiency. We don't have, what we have is a nutritional deficiency that's leading to a chemical deficiency. Mm-hmm. Our bacteria in our gut actually helps to create serotonin, our happy hormone. So if we don't have good, happy chemical and, you know, good bacteria, we're not making our happy hormone in our intestinal system. So, you know, we're treating the wrong organ, in my opinion, and I think the wrong interventions with trauma. There's so many therapies available for trauma. You know, trauma is another one. You know, why aren't we treating these children that, you know, most of them have some kind of profile for trauma, and why are we just putting Band-Aids on everything?
Woo.
So it's a lot.
Well, you
started this whole thing for me as far as finishing my book and getting my Facebook page up.
Okay, good. So tell people now where they can, I mean, Evan and Jen's story is a DVD extra. It's on the Heal DVD and Heal on iTunes or Amazon, but it's also on YouTube now, correct?
Yes, I believe it is now up there. It's on your YouTube channel, I believe.
Okay. On Heal's YouTube channel. And then where can they find your book or more information about you? What's your Facebook page?
Yeah, so my website is www.healingwithouthurting.com. And on there actually is a link to the documentary as well. And then also there are links there for my book. It's available on Amazon. It's been on, you know, Barnes and Noble, basically anywhere where a book is sold, it is available. Sometimes you have to order it because it might not be on the shelf, but it, you know, now with the whole internet world, it's a much different world today in publishing. So Amazon is pretty much where everyone gets it. But if you go on my website, I have many articles up there that are very, very helpful to get you kind of started in this whole journey. And so, yeah, I would just start there. And my Facebook page is Healing ADHD and Asperger's Without Hurting. Is also me.
And do you offer private counseling for people that want to, or just work as a therapist? What are you offering personally?
Yeah, so personally, you know, I'm very busy as a regular therapist. I do trauma therapy is my primary goal. But I do offer on my website, I do have some videos that people can download and watch. I also started a private group for people who want more information and to get to really dig deep. This way it's much easier for people to kind of get the information in a smaller group. And I, you know, answer questions all the time. So they can just message me at www.healingwithouthurting@gmail.com if you're interested in the link to that private group. It's a private group on Facebook. And I also do one-on-one, you know, educational counseling / kind of consultation with people that just kind of want to get a head start in all of this. And sometimes people call me with their test results and just want to run it by me, or they have a question about how to get their kids on board with some of these things. So yeah, lots of different ways to kind of get the message out there and to really get our kids better. I mean, that's my main goal is I love everybody's kid, every single one out there. And that's all I want is to reach every kid in every family to be able to help them live the best and the healthiest life they can.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you. And I know everybody that tuned in did. Thank you for your comments. We had someone from New Zealand, from all over the world tuning in. If you want to dive deeper, get her book, reach out on Facebook, Healing Without Hurting. And just thank you so much. It's you know, it's all about awareness and it's all about healing without hurting.
Yeah. So, thanks, Kelly. Thanks so much for everything. And the documentary is beautiful.
Thank you
so much.
Happy holidays, everybody.